The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slipped through the mail slot like any other piece of correspondence, completely unremarkable except for the fact that it would destroy everything I thought I knew about my identity. I remember standing in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the return address that meant nothing to me. A law firm in a city I had never visited, a name I had never heard. Inside was a single sheet of paper, notarized and official, containing information that would unravel 37 years of family history in the span of a few sentences. And at the bottom, written in careful cursive, a note that said simply, "Your grandmother wanted you to know the truth." Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional family dramas, hidden truths, and unforgettable endings, subscribe to Life Tangle Secrets. Every story here reminds us that the truth always finds its way into the light. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Claire, and for the first 37 years of my life, I believed I was a Bennett. The Bennetts were a prominent family in our small New England town, a name that carried weight and history. My grandfather, Harold Bennett, had been a respected judge. My grandmother, Eleanor, was a philanthropist who hosted charity galas and knew everyone who mattered. My father, Richard Bennett, was a successful architect who had designed half the buildings in the county. We were the picture of respectability, the kind of family that other families aspired to be. Except for me, I was the black sheep, the one who never quite fit. I was quieter than my siblings, more bookish, less interested in the social climbing that seemed to define the Bennett way of life. My mother used to say I had my grandmother's temperament, a vague compliment that I later realized was her way of saying I didn't belong. My childhood was comfortable but cold. We lived in a grand Victorian house on Maple Street, a house filled with antique furniture and crystal chandeliers and family photographs that lined every wall. The photographs were a Bennett tradition, an ever-growing gallery of our illustrious history. Generations of Bennetts stared down from those walls, their faces frozen in time, their eyes judging anyone who dared to disrupt the family legacy. I grew up in the shadow of those photographs. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother William, who was destined to take over the family architecture firm, and my younger sister Margaret, who was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I was the one who got average grades, who had average friends, who led an average life. In a family of overachievers, average was practically a crime. My relationship with my parents was strained from the start. My father was distant, always working, always preoccupied with his next project. He would come home late, eat dinner in silence, and retreat to his study. My mother was obsessed with appearances, with maintaining the Bennett image, with making sure that no one outside our family ever glimpsed the dysfunction that lurked beneath the surface. The first cracks appeared when I was 16. I had been given a school project to research our family history, to create a family tree and write about our heritage. I was excited at first, eager to learn more about the people whose photographs lined our walls. I went to my mother, asking for access to the family records, the old photo albums, the boxes of documents that I knew were stored in the attic. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between fear and anger. "There's nothing up there that would interest you," she said, her voice tight. "Why don't you just use the internet like everyone else?" But I was persistent. I was a teenager, and I had a project to complete. I waited until my parents were out for the evening, and I crept up to the attic, determined to find the records I needed. What I found instead was a locked metal box, hidden behind a stack of old suitcases. The lock was flimsy, and with a bit of effort, I managed to pry it open. Inside was a photograph. A single photograph, yellowed with age, of a woman I had never seen before. She was standing beside a man who looked exactly like my grandfather, except his face was younger, his hair darker. The woman had my eyes, the same shade of green that none of the other Bennetts had. She was beautiful, with a warm smile and a hand resting on her belly, clearly pregnant. On the back of the photograph, in faded handwriting, were the words, "Eleanor and Gerald, 1943. Eleanor was my grandmother, but who was Gerald? I was still staring at the photograph when I heard footsteps on the attic stairs. My mother appeared, her face white with rage. She snatched the photograph from my hands, her fingers trembling. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "This is none of your concern." I tried to ask her about it, about who the man was, about why the photograph was hidden away. But she refused to answer. She told me to go to my room, to forget what I had seen, to never mention it again. Her voice was so sharp, so final that I did as I was told. But I didn't forget. I couldn't forget. That was the beginning of my exile. From that moment on, I was treated differently. My mother became distant, almost cold. My father stopped acknowledging me at all. My siblings, who had always been competitive, became openly hostile. It was as if they had all agreed, without saying a word, that I was no longer part of the family. The photographs were the first to go. I noticed it gradually at first. A family portrait that had hung in the hallway was replaced with one that didn't include me. The Christmas card photos stopped featuring my face. By the time I was 18, I had been completely erased from the Bennett family gallery. When I confronted my mother about it, she simply said, "You don't look like us, Claire. You never have. It's better this way." I left home shortly after that. I moved to the city, attended college, built a life of my own. I told myself I didn't care about the Bennetts, that I was better off without them. I married a kind man named Michael, a high school teacher who loved me for who I was, not for my family name. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and I swore to myself that they would never know the rejection I had experienced. They would grow up knowing they were loved, valued, cherished. For years, I lived in blissful ignorance. I didn't speak to my parents. I didn't speak to my siblings. I received the occasional invitation to family events, weddings and funerals and milestone birthdays, but I never attended. There was no point. I had been erased, and I had made peace with that. Then the envelope arrived. The letter inside was from a law firm representing the estate of Eleanor Bennett, my grandmother, who had passed away 3 months earlier. The firm had been instructed to contact me upon her death, to deliver a sealed package that she had prepared years before. In the package was a death certificate, a birth certificate, a marriage license, and a letter written in my grandmother's elegant cursive. I read the letter in my kitchen, my hands shaking, my coffee growing cold on the counter. My grandmother began by apologizing. She said she had wanted to tell me the truth for so many years, but she had been afraid. She had been afraid of the scandal, of the shame, of what it would do to the family reputation. But now, with her death imminent, she had decided that I deserved to know. The truth was simple and devastating. Gerald, the man in the photograph, was my biological grandfather. Harold Bennett, the respected judge, the patriarch of the family, was not. In 1943, Eleanor had been a young woman in love with a man her family deemed unsuitable. Gerald was a soldier, a kind and gentle man who had been deployed to the Pacific Theater shortly after they discovered she was pregnant. Her family, the powerful and respected family she came from, had forced her to marry Harold Bennett instead. Harold was wealthy, influential, and willing to marry her despite the pregnancy. The agreement was simple. Eleanor would marry Harold, she would give birth to Gerald's child, and Gerald would be erased from history. The family would raise the child as Harold's own, and no one would ever know the truth. My grandmother agreed to the arrangement because she had no choice. She was a young woman, pregnant, unmarried, in a time when such things could destroy a family. She married Harold, gave birth to a son, and spent the next 60 years living a lie. The son was my father, Richard Bennett, who grew up believing that Harold was his biological father. But here was the truth, the one that would change everything. Harold Bennett had never been able to father children. The marriage had been a cover, a way to save face, a way to preserve the family name. My father, and by extension me and my siblings and all of my cousins, were not Bennetts at all. We were Gerald's descendants, the children of a man who had died in the Pacific without ever knowing his child. And there was more. My grandmother had kept a journal, a detailed account of the events, the pressure she had faced, the lies she had told. She had also kept a box of letters from Gerald, love letters written from the front lines, letters that painted a picture of a man who had loved her desperately, who had dreamed of a life with her, who had died never knowing that his child had survived. The law firm was instructed to deliver all of this to me, the only person in the family who my grandmother trusted with the truth. She said she had watched me grow up, had seen how I was treated, how I was erased from the family history. She said she had tried to stand up for me, to tell my mother to stop, but my mother had been too consumed by her own shame. My mother knew the truth. She had always known. And instead of accepting it, she had taken out her anger on me. I sat in my kitchen for hours, reading and rereading the letter, the documents, the journal. The family I had grown up in, the name I had carried, the legacy I had been taught to be proud of, none of it was real. The Bennetts had stolen my identity. They had erased my biological grandfather from history. They had forced my grandmother into a loveless marriage. And then, when I was born with the same eyes as the man my mother had been raised to hate, they had erased me too. If you've ever been judged, betrayed, or underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you, let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this journey, subscribe to Life Tangle Secrets for more unforgettable stories. I thought about going back to the Bennett house, about confronting my mother, about demanding answers. I thought about making a public announcement, revealing the truth to everyone, destroying the family reputation once and for all. But then I thought about my grandmother's letter, about her apology, about her desperate hope that I would understand why she had been forced to live a lie. She had ended the letter with a request. She asked me to do something she had never been brave enough to do. She asked me to claim my real name, the name of the man who had loved her and given his life for his country. She asked me to tell the truth, not with anger, but with grace. She asked me to honor Gerald's memory by living openly, honestly, without the shame that had haunted her entire life. I decided to go back, not to confront, not to destroy, but to understand. I called the number on the letter, the law firm that had sent it, and I arranged a meeting. I traveled back to the town I had left behind, back to the Victorian house on Maple Street, back to the family that had erased me. My mother was shocked to see me. My father had passed away several years earlier, but my mother was still living in the family home, surrounded by the photographs, the antiques, the lies. I told her what I knew. I showed her the letter, the journal, the documents. I watched her face crumble as the truth came out, the truth she had been hiding for over 60 years. She tried to deny it at first. She said the documents were forged, that my grandmother had been old and confused, that I was just bitter and looking for revenge. But when I showed her the photograph, the one I had found in the attic all those years ago, the one with my grandmother and Gerald, she finally broke down. She told me the whole story, the same one my grandmother had written in her journal. She told me how she had grown up knowing the truth, how she had been raised with the weight of that secret, how she had been taught to hate the man who had fathered her father. She told me that when I was born, when she saw my eyes, the same green eyes that were in that photograph, something inside her had broken. She couldn't look at me without seeing Gerald, without feeling the shame of a lie that had been perpetuated for generations. I listened to her confession without anger. I felt pity more than anything. She had been a victim of the same system that had victimized my grandmother, a system that valued reputation over truth, that forced people into impossible choices, that punished people for loving the wrong person. But I also felt something else, a sense of freedom. I was no longer a Bennett, not really. I never had been. The family that had erased me, that had rejected me, had been living a lie. They had been pretending to be something they weren't, and I had been the only one brave enough to question it. I didn't sue them. I didn't demand an apology. I didn't try to take back the inheritance I had never received. I simply walked away, one last time, and I never looked back. The next week, I filed the paperwork to legally change my last name. Not to Bennett, but to my grandfather's name, the name of the man who had loved my grandmother, who had died for his country, who had never known he had a family. I changed my name to Gerald's last name, the name that should have been mine all along. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my identity. It was about honoring the truth, even when the truth was painful. It was about breaking the cycle of lies and secrets that had poisoned my family for generations. I told my children the truth, the full truth, about their great-grandfather Gerald, about the soldier who had loved and died, about the grandmother who had been forced to live a lie. I told them that their name came from a man of courage and honor, not from a family of cowards who had hidden from the truth. And something incredible happened. As I spoke, As I told the story, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The rejection, the pain, the decades of feeling like I didn't belong, it all fell away. I realized that I had never truly been a Bennett. I had been a prisoner of the Bennett name, trapped in a family that never accepted me because I was a constant reminder of a truth they couldn't face. But I wasn't a prisoner anymore. I was free, free to be who I was, free to live my truth, free to honor the legacy of the man who should have been my grandfather. I never spoke to my mother again. I don't know if she's still alive or if she's passed away. It doesn't matter. I've made peace with my past, not through forgiveness, but through acceptance. I accept that I was a victim of a system that valued lies over truth. I accept that I was rejected by people who were too weak to face their own history. And I accept that none of that defines me. What defines me is the decision I made to walk away, to build a life of my own, to tell the truth even when it was hard. What defines me is the love I have for my children, a love that is unconditional and untainted by the poison of the Bennett legacy. What defines me is my grandfather's name, the name that I carry with pride, the name that I will pass on to future generations. The lesson I learned through all of this is that family is not about blood or names or photographs on a wall. Family is about love, about acceptance, about the people who see you and choose you, not because of who you are supposed to be, but because of who you truly are. The Bennetts were never my family. They were a collection of people bound together by a lie that I was brave enough to expose. My real family, the family I choose, is the one I built. My husband, my children, the friends who stood by me, the people who loved me without conditions. That's what matters. That's what I hold on to. When I look in the mirror now, I see a woman who has been through hell and come out the other side. I see a woman who was erased from her family history but wrote her own story instead. I see a woman who refused to let a lie define her, who chose truth over comfort, who found the strength to claim her real identity. And I see the eyes of a man I never met, a soldier who loved too deeply for his own good, a man whose legacy lives on in me and in my children. The photographs in that Victorian house on Maple Street still hang on the walls, frozen in time, bearing a name that was never truly ours. But I have my own photographs now, photographs of my family, photographs that capture who we really are. And there's something beautiful about that. The truth finally told. The name finally claimed. The family finally whole. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Life Tangle Secrets for more powerful stories where hidden truths become life-changing lessons. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.